Welcome to the chapter 7 of the book of Hebrews. The writer, who I believe is Paul, is continuing his talk about the Melchizedekian priesthood from chapter 6. We read a little bit. We'll go into that again. To me, the theme of this chapter is one of the more important themes of the New Testament, and that is the imperfection of the priesthood or man-made religion. Any type of a religion it just doesn't stack up to the priesthood of Jesus Christ. In verse 1 it begins, "For this Melchizedek, Vasilevs, with basil plant as a derivative of Salim, priest of God the highest, Theou, the one having met with Abraham, returning from the slaughter of the Vasilion, the kings, and Evlogesus him, eulogy, blessed him, having blessed him." That is the king, Melchizedek, blessing Abraham. We'll go to an Old Testament and pick up on that. It says, "And came forth," in Genesis 14:8, Exodus 14:8, "and came forth the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela." This is Zor. "And they deployed themselves for war in the salty valley against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, the 4 kings against the 5. And the salty valley had wells of asphalt, tar. And the king of Sodom fled, and the king of Gomorrah, and they fell in there. And the ones being left behind fled into the mountainous area. And they took all the cavalry of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their foods, and they went forth. And they took also Lot, the son of the brother of Abraham, and his belongings, and moved, for he was dwelling in Sodom. And a certain person of the ones being rescued, coming, reported to Abram, to the traveler, and he dwelt at the oak of Mamre, the Amorite of the brother of Eshcol, and the brother of Aner, who were confederates of Abram. And Abram, having heard that Lot, the son of his brother, had been captured, counted out his own native-born servants, 310, and he pursued unto Dan." Now, that's the area, which is interesting here because Dan was not until the time of Moses. So, if Abraham wrote this, Moses wrote this, then I guess did he know where the place was of Dan? Good question. "And he fell upon them at night, he and his manservants. And he struck them and pursued them unto Hobah, which is at the left of Damascus, which is in Syria today. And he returned all the cavalry of Sodom. And he returned Lot, the son of his brother, and all his possessions, and the women and the people. And the king of Sodom came forth to meet him after his returning from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and the kings with him into the valley of Shaveh. This was the plain of the king. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread loaves and wine. And he was priest of God the highest. And he blessed him," that is, the king blessed Abraham, "and he said, Abram, a blessing to God the highest, who created the heaven and the earth. And blessed be God the highest, who delivered up your enemies under your hands to you. And Abram gave to him 1/10 from all." Tithe. And so this is the story now that was being told by the writer of Hebrews, of returning from the slaughter of the kings, having blessed him, the king Melchizedek blessing Abram, and Abram, to whom also Abram portioned 1/10 of all, whose first name indeed being translated King of Righteousness. Now the first proton is Greek word. We get the proton, and our prototype, the first type. And now it wasn't not Abraham's name. It's talking about the name of Melchizedek, because it says the name first indeed being translated King of Righteousness. And my friend Rich, who's a Messianic Jew, I called him up and I said, well, where is this say that he's a King of Righteousness? And can you call me back? And he said, I know right now. And I said, well, what is it? And he says, well, it's the Hebrew word for Melech, or Melchizedek. It doesn't have vowels, so it's a M-L-K-H in Hebrew, of course. Melch is king, and Zedek is righteousness, Z-D-K. So it's actually his name, whose name first, indeed, being translated as King of Righteousness, and thereupon also King of Salim. And this is where he was living in Jerusalem, which is King of Peace. And Salim, Jerusalem, is Shalom in the Hebrew, and that's translated into Irenes, which means peace. The woman's name Irene comes from that, so which is King of Peace. Melchizedek, Apator, Amitor. The alpha here is a negative, like we would have unrelated instead of related. Here it's when the makes it into a negative, fatherless and motherless. Genealogitos, no genealogy. The genealogitos is a transliteration. He had no genealogy. You don't know anything about him. Neither beginning of days nor having an end of life. And taking an exact image to the Son of God, abides a priest for perpetuity. Forever. And view how great this one was, Melchizedek, to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave even a tenth from out of the choice parts, a tithe. And indeed, the ones from out of the sons of Levi, receiving the priesthood, have a commandment to tithe the people according to the law. That means they collect money from the people, a tithe, a 10%, the same amount that Abraham paid to Melchizedek. The lesser tithes to the greater. So the priesthood receive a tithe from the people, so that puts them higher than the people, according to the nomon, a law, astronomy, the nomi, a law. That is to say, the ones of their brothers, the other Jews, though they are ones having come forth from out of the loin of Abraham. So the Levites came out from the loin. They were one of the 12 sons. So I said Dan was one of the 12 sons, Jacob, and so that I don't know how. I guess he knew where the land was when he was writing it. Anyway, so anyway, they came from the loin of Abraham, basically, but the one not tracing descent from out of them received a tenth from Abraham. So the Melchizedek, which doesn't trace a descent, we don't know where he came from or anything, received a tenth, which makes him greater, and has blessed the one having the promises. Abraham had the promises. He blessed him. But separate from all dispute, antilogias, the lesser is blessed by the better. The higher or the better blesses somebody else that's lower, that you have the power of the blessing. And here indeed, men who receive tithes or tenths, men die who receive tenths, or men who receive tenths die. I think that would have probably been a better way of doing it. But there receives tenths, one being witnessed of that he lives. And then, so Melchizedek received the tenth. So then he's showing that the priesthood, they die. but this Melchizedek does not die. He's in perpetuity, as it said. And as literally to speak, through Abraham, even Levi, the one receiving tenths, that is from the people, he pays a tenth. So he's basically, because Levi came through Abraham, and Abraham paid the tenth. For a while, I forgot to put the links. I just have to do it by hand. For he was from the loin of the father when Melchizedek met with him. So basically, Levi hadn't been born, but he was coming through Abraham. If indeed, then perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, what still, and I'll go down after the parentheses, what still need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek, for the people establish law upon it. So the priesthood was made and came together, and after the tabernacle was built, and the priests came in, and then the laws were all established via this priesthood. Without the priesthood, you basically don't have the Levitical laws, as is today in Israel. So what still need was there for another priesthood to arise? Well, and not to be called according to the order of Aaron. Good question. Well, for the priesthood was being transposed, from out of necessity also a transposition of law takes place. Well, but it did. God did have Melchizedek, person of Jesus probably, and Abraham gave him the tenth. So basically, this the Levitical law was to the Levites, and the Levitical law that was in the Torah. But the Melchizedekian priesthood doesn't have laws, as it'll show. The person of Melchizedek was a high priest, but he was an intermediary between us and God in spiritual way, rather than making up a whole new codex of the law. For of whom these things are spoken, partakes of another tribe. Melchizedek is now Jesus. Now he's bringing it into that. For of whom these things are spoken, partakes of another tribe, from which no one has given attention to the altar. The only tribe giving attention to the altar were the Levites. For it is exposed to view that our Lord has risen from out of Judah. And it says in Genesis 49:10 that the scepter, the leader comes from Judah, the scepter, and then the lineage of Judah in Luke 3:33 is where Jesus came through the lineage of Judah. For which tribe Moses spoke nothing concerning priesthood, because he didn't know Jesus. He had the Levites. But now Jesus is here, and it's showing that Jesus is a priest of Melchizedek, and he has a different, he's higher than the Abraham and the Mosaic laws, the Levitical laws, and his person is not making a law, unless you would say the law of love. And more extra still, it is quite evident, since according to the likeness of Melchizedek, another priest arises, Jesus, who not according to the law of fleshly commandment exists, but according to the power of an indissoluble life. So Jesus is not coming to an end forever, but the priests die. For he testifies that God, you are a priest into the eon according to the order of Melchizedek. And this is in Psalms. So a priest, so now the Jew, if you're Jewish and you haven't heard this before, this is really an important thing to show you that it's not an invention of the New Testament with Christ. Who is Melchizedek? Melchizedek, Abraham saw him and gave him 10% of everything he had. Melchizedek was on a high plane, and in Psalms, David mentions him, and that you are a priest into the eon, according to the order of Melchizedek. Your Levitical priesthood, which doesn't exist today in Israel, and if it did exist, it's not for the eon. It could come to an end, just like it has come to an end in 70 A.D. when it was destroyed. Now, there's rabbis, but it's not the same thing. So this is an important thing. If you see that and you grasp it, then you see that there is something here to Jesus. If this is, and it's in Psalms, it's saying it. It's not in the New Testament. For he testifies that you, the Messiah, are a priest into the eon according to the order of Melchizedek. So he supersedes everything else. So if people have a hard time with that, saying, well, he got rid of the law. Well, he didn't get rid of the law. The law is still there, but he's basically Melchizedek, a high priest, way higher than the high priest of the day, which ended up becoming a paid position. Wasn't even Jews sometimes that became high priests. For, in 18, we'll continue here, for indeed an annulment of the commandment takes place because of its weak and unprofitable state. The law is annulled. This is the best that could be said about it. And the Jews today would have he's getting rid of the law. Well, it's annulled. For the law perfected nothing. But there is the further introduction of a better hope through which we approach to God. So either you want to approach God two ways. One way is through the law and doing all the things in the law, which can't do because we don't even have the priesthood anymore, basically, or hope. And the hope is Jesus Christ. And according to as much as not separate from the swearing of an oath, he was made priest. Then there's a parenthetical phrase here again. He was made priest. Let's see where it ends. By so much of a better covenant, Jesus has become surety. So now we see it's talking about Jesus here. So Jesus has become surety. For indeed the ones separate from swearing of an oath are become priests. They become priests because they're Levites. It's a lineage. But the one with swearing of an oath by God, through the saying as to him, the Lord swore by an oath and will not change his mind. You are a priest into the aeona, according to the order of Melchizedek. By so much of a better covenant, Jesus has become surety. Surety is like a down payment or a bond that's there. We know he has died, paid the price, and the price of our redemption. And indeed, there are more priests being try to get rid of this. I'm hitting the wrong keyboard. Oh well, to get rid of this yellow. And indeed, there are more priests being in existence, restrained from remaining on account of death. But he, Jesus, because of his abiding into the eon, has the inviolable priesthood, as he had mentioned earlier. So the priesthood now is in the hands of Jesus. If you're a Jew, because you certainly don't have a priesthood in Israel, from where he is able even to deliver totally the ones coming forward through him to God. So if you're a Jewish person, and all of a sudden you see, wow, Jesus is Melchizedek, the high priest, Now I go through him. At all times, you couldn't before because nobody knew what it was talking about. All of a sudden, this Melchizedek pops up and out of nowhere and with Abraham, and then another 1,000 years later, David mentions him out of nowhere, quotes God, and now Jesus. So if you're a Jew, I mean, just to me, once you see this and you go, wow, then I'm going to listen to this and read it more, then this is really some powerful thing. Coming through him to God at all times, living to intercede for them. Jesus is a high priest interceding for us. For such a chief priest becomes us. He's sacred. That means he's holy, separate from sin. Akakos, there's kaka is bad, and he's not bad. I use guileless. Undefiled, not polluted with horrible stuff. He's being separated from sinners, from the sinners, becoming higher than the heavens. Well, where is that? Black hole? I don't know. Higher than the heavens. Jesus comes down to the earth and visits, takes human form, an alien. And he comes and tells us about another alien place. There are all these aliens, angels and archangels, and at one time the angels left, and all these things that he comes and tells people that he sees. He's come from the Father through the womb of a virgin who had never had sex, and he's grown up as a human, and he's half God, half man, and he is not sin. Who has not had a daily necessity, as the chief priests had prior, to offer for their own sins. They had to offer for their sins. I was telling you in the 6th chapter how it's horrible if to be a high priest and to go in there with your sin in front of God. Whoa, boy! Or even to do what I'm going through reading the Bible. I mean, it's not it's a serious thing. And thereupon for the sins of the people. For this he did once for all, having offered himself. The high priest has sin, but not Jesus. Wouldn't you rather go to a high priest that's not into the Holy of Holies and smoking a cigarette and laying back and looking at his watch, waiting for the hour to go so he can leave and could care less about anything? You doing the sacrifice right, you don't know if he's doing anything right in there. But here you have this man, God, who's done everything perfect. He died on the cross and made the sin once for all. For the law ordains men. It ordains priests and chief priests through the Levites, ones having weakness. But the word of the swearing of an oath, the one after the law, has perfected a son into the eon. There is no place that I see of us becoming Melchizedekian priests. I think I have read about that in David Koresh and some cults where they end up grabbing a hold of this and telling people things that they don't know anything about and talking people into being something that they're not. And people end up listening to a lot of people without going through the Word. And it's a sad state of affair, but it's definitely a state of affair. So again, the theme that a priesthood, a religion, is nowhere near, is not going to do it. Only Jesus Christ can redeem you. Next, chapter 8, we'll go in a little further with the chief priest of the new covenant, of which we are under. The Jews of the old were not. And interesting, chapter 8, and hope you'll join us in the next chapter, and God bless.